All right. Today we're here with Dr. Jay Sarkar. Jay, would you please introduce yourself and tell us a bit about your company and what stage you're at in your business or in your ventures?
Right. So thanks, Brian and Melissa, for organizing this. My name is Jay Sarkar. I'm a serial entrepreneur in largely the longevity tech space or anti-aging space. And I've worked primarily with very early stage startups, so ground level seed funding kind of thing. And I also collaborate between academia and different ventures in the space. Because this area really is something that requires a lot of different types of resources, utilities, minds, and things in that.
Could you tell us how you got to where you are today, basically your path to becoming a founder?
Yeah, it's a relatively non-linear kind of trajectory. I think very few people actually get into entrepreneurship kind of thinking that they're going to get there or that's their life goal or those kind of things. It usually comes from a passion of a specific question or a specific area, as it was for me. And largely, I was even thinking that I would just do it in academia and pursue it maybe with traditional kinds of funding and traditional spaces. But more and more, I saw kind of the real need for a different prerogative or a different imperative in terms of the way that things are progressing or the types of questions people are willing to explore, especially when it comes to more kind of out there pushing it kind of fields like anti-aging or longevity. So that's, I did my PhD work, and naturally, as some of the questions we were trying to answer were becoming harder and harder for maybe traditional academia or outside of the space, I should say, of traditional academia, we started to having to make contacts and getting resources and even scientific technologies from other areas in industry. And so that kind of lighted the spark, and then their interest in what we were doing, of course, helped kind of solidify those initial talks and eventually getting us into something like a startup.
And so what was it that led for you to found a startup? And what did you see happening that made you think like this really needs to exist?
Yeah. Well, so I think in my first experience, it really was just, I had a question I was trying to answer, right? And just continually, following that and building it. And really, when you start these things, it's kind of just a team of one. It's your idea, and you're trying to push it forward. And you, of course, from advisors and researcher collaborators, things like that. But just after a while, you you put in so much energy, you put in so much time, and then you pass some kind of activation energy or some kind of threshold where it gets exciting for just more than you or just more than your small team. And that kind of momentum, I think, is what really then kind of pulled me into it. Because at that point, I just saw so much enthusiasm for what we were doing, that it was more than just, my thesis project or just another paper to publish, that really people wanted, a tangible solution, which was always my interest. But to some degree, I'd never seen myself actually getting into that space to actually make a product out of it. That was something that still in my head hadn't clicked yet. But just after, we got so much support and so much interest, naturally you feel pulled to it or magnetized to it.
Awesome. What barriers, like personal or cultural, systemic, psychological, et cetera, have you encountered on your path in entrepreneurship, and how have you overcome them?
Right. I think probably the one that I face more often than not is kind of, at least in my field, in biology, it's much more kind of a traditional space, very much about, okay, well, drugs need X amount of time to develop, and you need all this expertise, and you need years of production and trials and things like that to even get a new idea that's worth moving forward. And I think there's a lot of sense, because of the way that that industry operates, that you need to be well along in your career before you even think about starting kind of a scientific endeavor. Usually that means, you're professor level or higher, and you typically have to have that kind of clout to even, push your weight around, or even to say that you have something of value. But I felt like, it's not necessarily the case, and I think that's a misunderstanding that field shares a lot, and you see that because traditional tech is a lot more about progressive ideas and young blood and getting new ideas in the ethos, and I think that's starting to happen. I think if anything, the recent kind of push for mRNA technology, for instance, which is one of the areas that I worked in, really caught a lot of big pharma and traditional enterprises by surprise. They didn't really see that coming in terms of investing a lot of manpower, ideas, or next-gen thinking. And I think they're now kind of suffering for it. And so I think now the mindset is changing, that we need to really involve younger people, newer ideas, newer people from outside the space. My own background being a physicist and not a biologist. All of these things are now, I think, are becoming real, especially when the field is moving so much more quickly, I'd say, than in past years even.
What is some popular entrepreneurial advice that you disagree with?
Yeah, there was one adage that I was told a lot early on, and it's something I inherently disagree with just from my own personality, but it's also something I think fundamentally is a misconception. So the phrase is, you need to spend money to make money. That's really one of these kind of things that are just thrown around to largely justify when you have a lot of expenses early on and you may not be familiar with that kind of burn rate or that kind of financing, especially because this is not something one would encounter in their personal life or something like that. I mean, you would imagine $1 million is something substantial for a personal life, but not, of course, for a business. But I think it also pretends kind of a different kind of understanding, which I think is false, is that, when you have a problem, throwing more money at it solves it. And I don't think that's the case. I think that's a poor approach when you really don't have any new ideas, or you don't have the cleverness to discover some, that you think, okay, well, I'm just going to invest more, I'm going to put more resources. And this is even a statement about science too, right? If I'm just going to run more experiments and more tests and more assays, and then hope I find or discover something new. I don't think innovation really works that way. I think it really comes from, in a lot of cases, situations where you don't have as many resources as you like, and you have to be, crafty, and you have to be innovative. You're kind of forced, necessity, kind of the mother of invention, kind of thing. And I think that logic really needs to be embodied by anybody who's actually planning to start a new business, because you also face the reality that you are the least financed in the game. If you're just starting something, you are probably the furthest behind in terms of resources. So if you ever want to catch up, then you really have to have something novel in terms of the way you think, or the way you approach a problem, or a new problem that no one's ever seen before or thought about before. There has to be more creativity in it than just resource.
How have your unique experiences influenced the way that you run your businesses?
Yeah. So I think my background, I kind of hint at a little bit before. So my background is actually in physics and electroengineering, and I'm now in a biology or biochemistry kind of case. And I think that's, it's something that's really powerful for my space, but in general, I think it's powerful for a lot of different startup areas, in that bringing in different kinds of thinking or different modes of thinking really creates the natural capacity to create new solutions, right? It's when you have the same kind of thinking, when you have the same kind of training or formalism, that might be useful for execution. I think that's critical. But at the same time, it kind of narrows you in the box and kind of really brings up the same kind of ideas and the same kind of approaches. So for instance, in the area of aging, people are used to traditional biology, which is very reductive, and people think about, okay, what are the specific pathways or the specific genes or elements that I need to solve this problem? And my own background being in physics and like engineering is I see everything as more of systems. I don't see them as individual components, but of complex. I don't really see it as, okay, well, it's just one thing that you need to solve and you walk away. My thoughts are more about, okay, well, what is the overall breakdown in the regulation of all of these things? And why does that fail as opposed to any one element? So just like elements like that, where if you can view the problem in a different way or at a different level or from a different perspective, I think that has shaped a lot of the way that I do the science and also the way I do the business. And one of the areas I think that Brian wanted to bring me in to especially talk about is this concept of PBCs, or public benefits corporations. And this is also kind of redefining the way that people look at corporations. And they think about, well, it's very much about meeting the investors and turning kind of this capitalistic incentive into maybe greater progress for society. But that doesn't mean that you can't go into the kind of ethos of making profit and making products without a core motivation for societal benefit too. You can't, it's not just kind of, oh, it gets it on the side or it's somewhat Darwinian, it'll happen, it happens. You can actually go into the space with that approach. And people have been doing this more and more where they've established that we have a mission and we have a cause and we're making decisions based on that in areas like clean tech, in ag tech and things like that. And if anything, my interest and enthusiasm about the problem really draws that I want to make similar kind of thing in medicine, because the same kind of truth that exists there, that a lot of the practices already in place are useful, they generate revenue, they help people, but they're not sustainable. And this is what leads to a lot of issues in our medical systems and our insurance and things like that. So if we can design solutions that are more sustainable in the same way that energy is more sustainable or where agriculture is more sustainable in medicine, then we can actually talk about addressing some of these healthcare crises that the US and other countries face as well.
How do you view failure as it relates to innovation? When is it part of the process and when is it unacceptable?
Yeah, I kind of took issue to that question. There are a couple of questions that were asking about failure. And I don't know, I don't really view the kind of absolute nature of failure that I think that is sometimes implied by that term. People kind of look at things as binary, that this is just a non-starter, it didn't work, there's no value to it, versus something that was successful or great or grand. I think everything that you learn, especially in a startup, is about progress and growing your understanding of something, right? So even kind of negative results, it's one kind of shame in academia, especially, is that we don't publish negative results. We don't usually like to publish those because there's no quote unquote value or excitement around. But all of these are really shaping our understanding of the problem, of the areas that we need to develop in. And even when you may find a finding that is counter to your hypothesis, or you may go into a business deal that doesn't work out the way you intend or whatever, all of these things are really shaping your strategy. They're more data points, they're more feedback. And if you're going into these scenarios, whether it's in science or whether it's in business, whatever the case, thinking that it's going to be binary, it's going to be yes or no, and I'm either going to win or I'm not, then you're going to miss the majority of the learnings that you could have actually taken, even if you do succeed, right? So even if you go into a deal and you find that everything worked out, well, you may have missed out in actually understanding who else was buying for the deal, or what are other interesting areas for the other partnership or the other partner in the collaboration, or whatever the case. And if you're walking away from it with just no final agreement, maybe you learned quite a bit about, okay, what are really the limitations of what your product can do, or what you're willing to do in forming some kind of partnership or investment. And the same thing is true in science, in life, and all of these aspects, that it really, the value from these experiences comes from something that's more multidimensional than just it worked or it didn't, or in that sense.
What do you think are the most critical challenges or changes that we must make to face the future effectively? And what are the barriers to enacting these changes?
Yeah, I think this is a little bit philosophical too, because there's a lot of trends that span everything. So if anything, everything is about relationships and the way that we can change people's behaviors or people's lifestyles to better improve themselves, society, and all those things. And I think, and that's one critical aspect of medicine, that it's trying to support ultimately the person to get back to a better lifestyle, better health, better engagement. And I think one of the things we've seen, especially in recent years, is that, and maybe this summarizes, I was thinking of the best way to put this, but maybe the ability to really find true value as opposed to kind of the plethora of noise and the plethora of kind of information that's out there. I think this is something that definitely needs to change in terms of society, in terms of, but also in terms of kind of regulatory bodies and in terms of business models and things like that. Because as I mentioned, right, so a lot of people, will throw all kinds of resources at the problem, will also put out a lot of solutions, and more, you get backlash in different senses. For one, the real kind of milestones or the real paradigms get overshadowed, and you're just getting kind of 10,000 drug analogs, or you're getting 10,000 products out there, and you may only get the one that's the marketed the best. It may not be the actual best value. It may not just be the least side effects. It could be the one that just has the biggest microphone. And so you have that and the ability to really tease out that. But I think it's happening the same way too. And we see kind of the general distrust for science and the distrust for a lot of technologies out there. We saw that with the vaccine and things like that, is that when you do have that kind of element of so much disinformation about either for marketing purposes or for political purposes, whatever the case, really trying to find value in what's out there and solutions that are being put forward to understand, why a technology has value, why it's different, why it's safe. These kind of things, either, and I don't have any solution for this, but either it takes more education or more engagement or more awareness. Because right now, we're kind of on the ride and a lot more is being kind of generated. We have definitely more capacity to generate solutions and to market them and to penetrate more of the population in terms of visibility of these things. But how do we still judge what has value and what has meaning and what we want to involve in our own lives and use in our own kind of bodies and maintain the lifestyle that we want? All of those things are evolving, and I don't know if the populace in general is evolving at that rate to match it at this point. So again, I don't have a solution for it, but it's definitely something that's been on my mind.
Jay, thank you so much for making the time to talk with us and sharing from your experiences, and your insight is just incredible. So thank you.
Happy to be here, and definitely hope there are a lot more out there who want to get into the space and really grow and see what they can do.